Morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a good start to the week, enjoying the Olympics, as many of us are. So I'd like to take you through one of our new products, the Sunlight Infrastructure Manager. I will also be diving a bit into one of the existing products, the Sunlight Dashboard, that has been there as part of the stack, just so you can see how the two integrate and go through with each other. So Sunlight Infrastructure Manager is a management platform that is deployed today in AWS. We have one pre-deployed here onto there. If I click down into the infrastructure, I don't have any cloud clusters that it's managing, but here I have a couple of demo test clusters that I have, one in California and a training cluster. From here, I can, if I need to, dive into the dashboard, and this will then sign me on into the local cluster manager that I have there. What we can do with Sunlight Infrastructure Manager, though, is it's a very powerful tool. So we have inside it something called the marketplace. And the marketplace is built on the Ansible framework, and we have a bunch of pre-populated recipes, or think Ansible playbooks, where you can go through and automatically deploy these applications. So I'm just going to pick FIO for this one. I can, if I want to, go and change the config file. So if I want to change the configuration of the virtual machines, etc., that it's going to go through. But for here, I'm just going to leave that as is, go out, and we'll deploy this onto my infrastructure. As I said, this will then, if need be, deploy a cluster if it's not already there in AWS, or if I pre-select a cluster, which I will do here, it'll go then deploy the application, and then that is then available to the users to do this. Marketplace is something that we're running and hosting. We're building our recipes ourselves, but you can also bring your own recipes and import these. So here you can see I can go and create a cluster, or I can already select one that is running here. So I'm just going to choose the Kali POC2, the training cluster, and deploy out onto a resource group. Now, at the moment, I haven't deployed a resource group onto there, so I'll go talk through that, how we get that through. But once you're here, you just deploy and go and click through. So if I look at resource groups, this is really a very powerful operation from the SIM, where it allows me to create multi-tenanted environments on your clusters. So here I have a couple of resource groups already. There's one here where I've actually deployed the workload already into there. And then down here, I've just created two test resource groups, resource group 1 and 2. And this is actually the place where you deploy virtual machines into. So a couple of CentOS test. These have all been deployed from available recipes that we have in our marketplace. So if I did want to build a new virtual machine, I can just click here, choose Create VM. At this point, I can choose a virtual machine specification. So this is the actual virtual hardware specs of my virtual machine, and go through. And I can also choose an image that I want to deploy from here. So I have a bunch of images here, and you'll also see I have a couple of templates that I've done, which I'll come back to, so please remember those ones there. But I'll just deploy one for now. I'll just choose another CentOS VM, choose a size that I want it to be, so I'll just give it the little test size. Choose a network that I want it created to, so these are networks that are available to me on the resource group that I have selected. Pick a data store that I want it to go on to, give it a name, and then I can go off, and this will then go and create my virtual machine out onto the infrastructure. As mentioned, so SIM is new product for us. So this is now going out and deploying onto the local cluster that I have here. Now, if you remember those virtual machine specifications, they are actually pulled in from the cluster that is being managed by SIM. So this is something at the moment, SIM being very new, there are a lot of things you still have to do at the local cluster layer, but we're migrating a lot of these features into the SIM layer. So here, if I have a look at the instant flavors, these actually match up to my virtual machine specifications. So I can go and pre-populate these create standard sizes for them. As it says there, I can create a flavor, and then Sim will then be able to see these and allow you to choose from them. Also, under the instances here, I can see any of the template VMs or any virtual machines that have been created. So just going to go onto here to see when the Matt VM is coming up. So if I look down here, there you can see my Matt webinar virtual machine that's being created as it goes through. Currently yellow buttons, so we're just waiting for that one to become available as it goes onto there. And once it becomes available, I'll be able to do the typical CRUD type commands on that virtual machine instance there, including migrate to another data store or to another host within the cluster, etc. to that. Also within Sim, when I've got the cluster here, I can actually add a cluster. So if there's an existing on-premises cluster, I can pull that in under the Sim management, but also I can go out and create a new AWS cluster directly from Sim. So we've been able to do this because we know how to build it via the APIs with there. So again, I'll just give it a name. And I want it to be, I'm just going to choose, let's see, which one do we want? I'll choose EU Central for that, 1A. I'm just going to deploy one node. So Sunlight can be deployed from a single node. You don't have, obviously, node redundancy at that layer, but it does work with a single node onto there. I'm not going to choose a spot instance. I'm just going to choose i3 Metal. You can see the different components that we do have. Up here, NexVisor type. NexVisor is our hypervisor. This is what the Sunlight stack is built upon. So you have a concept of a master node and then secondary nodes in there. And then I'll just go down and add that. And this will then go out and deploy that. Using the same framework that we have here, you can automate the deployment of clusters into your own IaaS solution. You know, if you think of something maybe like Equinix or Rackspace, something like that, you could deploy the same process and workflow doing that right directly from here. So as I mentioned, we had resource groups. This is where we do a lot of our deployment actions because they can be across the clusters. So at the moment, I'm signed in as the admin, and I have visibility of all the resource groups. So another core component of SIM is around user management. So we have a bunch of users that you can create here, and they get assigned roles and whether they're enabled or active. So you can see currently down here, I'm signed in as admin, and that is the active role. I can enable, disable, etc., deassign. I have created a user called Matt Test before down here, and I can choose whether to, again, disable or enable him. But Matt Test is really only enabled to see one user group. So at this point down here, I can go into resource groups here, and I can decide, well, actually for user group 2, I actually only want this person to see Matt Test to see that. So at this point here, I can create multiple resource groups which align to host, compute, network, storage, but then I can assign a user to each one to give you that full isolation and multi-tenancy onto that. When I'm finished here, we'll sign in again. So you, as Matt Test, you can see that there is isolation, and I won't be able to see all the resource groups there. Another feature that we deployed into SIM is concept of backups and restores. So I've created a couple of jobs just over the weekend here. So I created a couple of one-off jobs and hourly jobs. And it's very simple to do. I can just click on a job, select the resource group that I wanted to go to. Once that resource group is there, you'll see here, it will pick out the virtual machines that are in there and the different ones. My Matt webinar one is available now. I can click on that and I can choose the frequency of the snapshot that it's going to take, and I can then schedule that. What that will actually do is take a snapshot of that virtual machine on the local cluster, or if it was an AWS-based cluster there, and transfer it to the SIM to be available here at the SIM. And then it converts it to a template. So a template, then you can see here, I had a couple of jobs. So there's my CentOS job. So it created it pretty quick that it did that, and I can go and delete that template if I want. And then the hourly one, you can see I've got a bunch here. I've just been going through deleting some just to free up space on the demo cluster so I don't upset the customer success team for messing around with their environment. But once these are created, I can then deploy these out onto local clusters. So I could take a snapshot of backup from one cluster and deploy it onto the other. And that is what I created the template here. So from a resource group here, I can choose to create the virtual machine. And down here was actually the template. So if someone builds a new virtual machine at a site, and that's something you want to redeploy out everywhere, through the backup and restore process that we have here with jobs and templates, we can deploy that out onto other clusters in the environment. So you can see here were the base images that it had pulled through that I saw, and then 2 local templates that I'd created onto that cluster. And you can pre-deploy these onto the cluster by downloading the image locally to make that deployment quicker as well in the background for you there. Just see, so there's our cluster. So you can see actually it is just deploying. It's preparing the storage nodes and getting those up and running for me. So I'm hoping we've timed this correctly and it will be ready by the end of the live demo that we're doing here to show you that on there as well. Other things that we have just in the SIM dashboard from the full management point of view, you see all the settings that we go through, and then also for support and secure tunnels into SIM, we can work at this level for there as well. So I'm just going to log out of here just to show you the different ones. So if I put in the password, so now I'm logged in as Matt Test. I will only see messages and activity that are relevant for myself. You can see some of the things are not here. And if I go into resource groups, you can see I did not give Matt Test permissions to see the clusters. So they don't show up under here under infrastructure. So at this point, I can give very fine-grained control over where a user can deploy. Do I want him to see clusters? No, I just want him to see the resource group that I've created for Matt, and then he can deploy onto there. You can see I can't see the FIO workload resource group because I had not given him permissions to that, but I can go and see everything within the 2 resource groups that I do have permissions to see, and that is here at the cores, memory, storage, etc. Now, the resource groups are here at the cluster. Today, we pre-create the resource groups on the cluster, so you have to go in at the cluster dashboard layer, and I can go and create a resource group here. And this is where I'll allocate on the system if there were cores, etc. available here, which data store I want them to see. So if I just click data store 2, I'll select the 2 compute nodes, and I can actually isolate single cores down to that resource group. So this can be handy if you're looking at a level of quality of service, or especially out at the edge. If you've got a couple of containers, a couple of VMs, you can get very granular with your control onto there to make sure all the applications and virtual machines have access to the resources that they need. And once this resource group was created, I would then be able to see that in SIM, assuming obviously in SIM I've given my user the correct permissions. Very powerful feature of the Sunlight platform onto there. Again here, CPU overcommit, do I want to enable the pinning to that, etc. We also have all the virtual disks that you can see at the dashboard, full visibility into here, and I can also see what type it is, whether it's secondary or a snapshot disk. So there's one of the snapshot disks that I had created over the weekend for that. And then at the dashboard layer as well, we have all the admin tasks that you would expect to see, the remote support that we have onto there, and you can see my SIM session. So this is the SIM instance that I'm connected to on the AWS platform, connecting into the dashboard dashboard cluster here. And then just for the last bit of visibility, just to show we have the infrastructure layer. So this is where I'll see the compute and storage of the hosts that come into here. And if I want to, I can also configure rack. So this is where I can create a new rack and pre-configure what my environment looks like when I start building out high availability, etc., into the environment. And we also have the 3 networks that are enabled, at which point here do I go and add physical NICs into them if I have more, or I can create private networks as well that we have onto there that adjust between the nodes within the cluster. So let me just sign out as Matt Test. Again, so now under infrastructure, you'll see I can see all my clusters because I have that full visibility again. I can see my deploy operation will work correctly for the virtual machine. So now I can go into the resource groups and I'll be able to see there's my Matt webinar, there's my virtual machine, all created, good to go. I can create a template from that or move the VM or delete it. You'll see today we don't have the full CRUD commands here for power off, etc. Those are things that we're working on. So those you still have to drop down into the dashboard layer to do that. I think you saw it's pretty quick, straight from the sim. I can just kind of single sign on straight down into there. And lastly, just on the cluster, so it is just taking a bit longer just to get that up and running, but that is something that we can just pre-deploy straight from the sim infrastructure layer. And here you can see at the moment on the 2 physical nodes I have on Kali POC2, I get the idea. I can see how many cores are being used, looking at the memory and the amount of storage that's available to that. Hopefully that's just been a very quick overview for you, showing you what's available in the Sunlight Infrastructure Manager today, but also driving down into the Sunlight dashboard to show you where we're pulling some of the actual resource information through. If you do want to know more about Sunlight, I'm going to drop to 2 links now, but Hannah, I believe we have a poll that we'd like some of the attendees to ask for us.
We do. I will launch it now.
Thank you. So within the Zoom now, you should see a poll launch. So I'm just going to say yes on mine. Oh, it's not going to let me vote. I can't rig the vote here. I'll let Hannah do that. So while Hannah's do that, docs.sunlight.io. This is our documentation site. It has everything about the platform listed here, including our API documentation. So the GUI that I just showed you uses the same single endpoint, the API endpoint, into the cluster. That is all detailed here under the SIM API. And then the API documentation listed here is for at the local cluster layer. And then also we are public about our performance information. So if you go to performance.sunlight.io, you can see all the information about testing that we've done here. We talk through the different setups that we have, how you get through information. And then if you drop down to the benchmarks, I can go through and see we're using FIO, which is a, as it says, standard tool that a lot of other vendors actually do use within their testing wrappers anyway. You can see the setup that we configure, and then also we have the results based on platforms that we've run on today. So you can see some of the more data center type platforms that we run on from Altos, and then we also run this on a couple of edge nodes, the little Lenovo ThinkSystems SE350s, very small information. I mean, we were able to hit a tremendous amount of performance just on those. And actually, that was one of the platforms that we automated with the xClarity product. We were able to automate the deployment from here. So we were able to add a cluster automatically, integrating with the xClarity with the SE350. So full integration at that point. And do we want to open up for Q&A and also see the results of the poll, please? Oh, okay. So a couple of people with the Edge project. So please do contact us. Either via the contact details you got on here, or I'm on matt.northam@sunlight.io. Happy to help you on that. And if you want to know anything more, get a deeper demo, deep dive into the system, talk more, anything that we can help with, please do that. But also, if there are any questions, I'll pause now and we can answer any questions that people may have online. If you can ask in the Q&A. So I've got a couple here. So one here, Peter asked, where does this platform reside? So currently, SIM can be deployed from AWS. If you go into the AWS marketplace today, it is there. Let me just, because this is all live, let's just go and show you. So if you click in here and you type in Sunlight, that I've done once or twice before, comes up, there is the SIM dashboard. So that will deploy the actual SIM that you saw. There are no clusters or hosts at that point, so it's free to deploy and get it done. And then what I did in the background, deploying a single node cluster, that was the NexVisor part here. Another one here, is there published API? Yes, that's at docs.sunlight.io. So everything there, I showed what's there. If there's not something there that you need, Peter, from the API documentation here, please reach out to me, let me know, happy to help and get there. But this is the single point of contact. The SIM API, so information process workflows I was doing in the SIM, actually then that uses the SIM API to talk to the local cluster API for all commands, and that's all the secure channel over there. This one here is support for Azure and GCP in the pipeline. Yes, so we are talking to both about being able to deploy SIM on their bare metal services onto there. So we're going through the process, doing the testing, making sure that everything's there. It's not just deploying on bare metal, it's how we store the snapshots for the templates and the storage, but we're working on both of those at the moment with GCP and Azure, and also actually Oracle Cloud, if anyone's using those. There's one I got here, another one, what is on the recipe? So let me just deploy or go to the recipe screen. So today we have quite a few recipes that the team have built up. So when we start on a new validating a new application, we will build a recipe as part of that. So Cloudera, TensorFlow, etc. Our own template server, Windows images that we have, base Kubernetes. We've recently started doing quite a bit of work with SUSE. So we've got K3S up and running, and their new micro Linux as well, which is a really tiny Linux distribution that they have, and also their enterprise one. And I know we're working on things like Rancher, etc. Alma was a new one I saw pop up. In the next release in September, October timeframe, we will allow people to import an Ansible playbook if you have one built already, with the tweaking that needs to be done to make it work on the backend infrastructure here. But it's pretty simple to build a new recipe as well. If they're not on docs, I'll make sure it is the published process on how to build a new recipe out onto the infrastructure here. You can see here, there's nothing installed yet, so I haven't run a local recipe against that's installed, but these are all available to people, and we have dev ones as well. You can also create your own private marketplace. So you can create recipes that are not available to anyone else, or again, through resource groups, only certain people will be able to see certain marketplace repositories that we have onto there. I think we got through all the questions. I'm just checking. Are there limits to the number of clusters? So technically, no. I mean, we've tested up to around 64 clusters with SIM, but it has been built with managing an entire edge infrastructure in mind. And that was one of the reasons why the method of deploying it inside a cloud such as AWS was chosen first rather than on premises. We are bringing out the on-premises version probably towards the end of this month, August, so you'll be able to deploy SIM on your own infrastructure, which might be good for MSPs or large enterprises who want the management component on their own network that they already have the secure connections out. So that will be available there. And what does this all cost? So as you've seen from docs.sunlight.io and the performance site, we're a very open and transparent company on there. And that includes our pricing. So our pricing is available on our pricing page. Nothing's hidden there. We have two versions or flavors of the product, so to speak, an edge and a data center one. Edge is aimed at these type of models, the embedded processors, so the smaller Lenovo's, the HP Edge lines, etc. So there's a hardware list for that, and then the data center product when you start getting up more into the dual CPU, the 48, 64 core systems onto there, and then you can add what you saw SIM there. This is all subscription based pricing on there, and these are list prices that are on the website. So in terms of comparing or getting an idea of is Sunlight right for yourselves, you should be able to see pretty quickly here. Happy to give more demos. You can spin up SIM yourself if you want. If you're happy to take the costs, spin up a cluster in AWS and start playing with it, but also be able to see the pricing to price out your edge environment very quickly. With that, Hannah, I'll stop sharing. I'll hand back to you just for any wrap-ups. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I think there might have been one question in the chat by Peter. Has Sunlight been deployed onto Cisco hardware?
I'll say that was in the chat. That's the one. We haven't done it as yet, Peter, but under the docs here, if you look at the deployment platforms, here's systems that we have deployed and tested this onto. Pretty much it comes down to the network cards. So today we support the Intel range. We have a beta release out that is testing for multi-NIC support, like from Mellanox and others, and the new 100 gig NICs from Intel. But if you look at the platforms that we are supported on, they're all pretty standard. It is mainly around, as with most platforms around the network and component support. So long as the components are on there, the network ones, as I quickly mentioned, we are supporting the newer Intels and Mellanox and other vendors there soon. Then yes, we can support that hardware and happy to work with people to help test and get that through. It's how we did the validation with Lenovo on their platforms for that. So happy to do that, but 90-95% sure most standard x86 platforms work. We do have a level of ARM support as well, but all ARM platforms are different, whether that's Bamboo or HiveCell or Lenovo ones, but happy to work on support for any of those platforms as well. So Sunlight originally came out of a project looking at deploying a hypervisor onto a small ARM architecture. So we do have quite a bit of experience with ARM and have one or two nodes. So things like the Raspberry Pi support you'll see, and the NVIDIA Jetson support will be coming out fairly shortly on that, for not saying to deploy live for your massive clusters, but there's definitely use cases we're seeing with the NVIDIA Jetsons, especially for this very small performant hypervisor at the edge to allow you to run containers and virtual machines in smart factories, etc.